am a doctor on a small 30-bed unit in a hospital in Washington State. It's just a hallway of rooms that end with a doorway going up and down the building, and other than that, there isn't much down that way, and so it's a little eerie when you're by yourself. Room 27 is near the end of the hall, near the stairwell. I have heard a variety of stories from both the nurses and patients of odd sounds and feelings at that end of the floor, but most of them seem to center around room 27. People have said that they have heard the sound of children playing in the room to sounds of people talking in the middle of the night when everyone is quiet and all the staff are back at the nurse's station. When we hear stories of people saying that they are hearing children playing, it's a red flag to us since there are no children on the entire floor. The pediatric unit in our hospital handles all the cases involving young children, so there would be no reason to hear these noises. This particular experience comes from an aide that told me what he had experienced when he was alone in the hallway near room 27 late at night. We were talking about some of the weird things people had experienced while working in the hospital, and so he told me his own story. He said that he was helping a woman go to the bathroom late one evening. He was just getting her settled into her bed for the night, and she asked him if he was going to assist the woman standing in the doorway. She told him that she had been there for a while and suspected that she needed help, and that is why she was waiting for him. He said he turned around, and there was no one there. Most of our patients on the floor can't go to the bathroom on their own, so a staff member is always present to make sure they don't fall. He told me he quickly settled the woman into her bed and got out of there as quickly as possible. This aide told me he was terrified by the experience and hadn't shared his experience with anyone before. Personally, I have even had an experience in room 27 myself. There was one evening when I was on duty, and most of the rooms were empty. We call this having a low census unit. I am assigned certain patients on the floor that I am responsible for, and other than in emergency situations, I don't really pay attention to the others. The bathroom on the floor is down the hallway, and I have to pass by room 27 every time I need to go. One evening, every time I would walk by the room, it was like I felt something off about the room. I couldn't explain why I felt that way, but it would unsettle me nonetheless. The room was especially dark that evening, but I just assumed the patient had wanted it that way to help him or her go to sleep. The door was propped halfway open, so I could see inside the room. Even as dark as it was, I could see the outlines of the room. I even saw what looked like a person lying on the bed on their side. All night when I passed by, I would have sworn there was a patient in there. But to my surprise, one of the aides went into the room to set it up for an incoming patient. I asked her where the person in the room had gone, and she gave me a funny look and told me there hadn't been anyone in the room all day. I argued with her that I had seen someone there, but when she showed me the logs of all the patients, it showed no one there. I was baffled. I had definitely seen and felt a presence in that room all night, which made me think someone was in there. The events definitely creeped me out. I have also had patients describe to me that they had heard sounds like someone was walking on the walls and the ceiling in that room. If they had just told me they had heard footsteps, I would have just thought it was one of the staff since we constantly walked around. However, they would swear that the sounds were coming from inside the room. There are just too many stories of odd things happening in that particular room for something not to be happening. One story is excusable, but the number continues to mount, even to this day. If I were staying in that room, I would be demanding to move.
One of the worst parts of working in a hospital is when a person dies, especially when it is one of the patients that you've gotten close to. This is especially the case for me, who works in the cancer wing. You see all kinds of people of all ages dealing with this horrible disease, and you spend months watching them go through the worst pain of their lives trying to fight back. Unfortunately, not all of them win. And when this happens, one of the worst parts of my job is to take the person's body down to the morgue. After what happened to me one night, the lines I thought existed between the living and the dead changed forever. I looked down at the face that just a few hours ago was contorted in such pain as her body shut down. I know she was scared to die, but she had accepted it and had a chance to say goodbye to the ones that were most important to her. It still is amazing to me how many people that are about to cross over are the ones who are comforting those that they will leave behind. But now her fight is done, and the pain she had experienced is in the past. I lifted the white sheet over her and maneuvered around to the end of the gurney. As I pushed the cart down the hall, I see people looking at me out of the corner of their eyes. It isn't just the patients or their families, but other staff too. Susan had been here for 3 weeks as her body failed her, but she had been here multiple times, going through chemo and any other therapy in a desperate attempt to save her life. None had worked, though, and the people in the wing would miss her. She was one of the people that would say, "Susan was going to beat this. Look how hard she is fighting." But in the end, that wasn't the case. I reached the elevator, and Tish, who was going down with me to the morgue, hit the button to call for the elevator. It only took a few seconds, and the chime announced the car's arrival. The doors opened, and I saw a few people filing out onto the floor. All of them gave the bed a wide berth as if the woman on the bed carried some sort of deadly virus. Hospitals are dedicated to treating the sick and wounded, and when that doesn't happen, the ones who have dedicated their lives to saving them take it the hardest. Some doctors don't even want to be around a dead person, thinking that somehow their streak of saving people will be jinxed. I pushed Susan into the elevator, and behind me, Tish hit the button for the basement. The elevator jumped to life and began its descent into the bowels of the building. The bed rattled from the jostling of sudden movement of the elevator, and I gripped the handles a little tighter to make sure it wouldn't roll around. I watched the numbers on the red LED panel reduce until the letter B was displayed. I heard the chime once again, and the doors slid open onto the long, white hallway. Tish walked out first, so it would be easier for me to get the bed out of the elevator. She turned around to make sure I didn't need any help as I began to push. Suddenly, the lights in the elevator flickered slightly, and when I only had the bed halfway out, the door began to close. Unable to do anything about it, I just let go of the bed, and the doors hit both sides at the same time. Fortunately, the emergency lever popped the doors open again without damaging the elevator or the bed itself. "That was weird," I told Tish. "Yeah, this place down here gives me the creeps," she said back to me. I grabbed back onto the handles and pushed the bed through the opening without any further problems. Our footsteps echoed down the empty hall as I continued with the grisly journey. Tish reminded me that she had put the body into the morgue the last time, so it was my turn to do it. "Great, I get to push the bed and put her away? It must be my lucky day," I replied with an obviously fake smile. To get to the morgue, you have to push the body up a ramp before you get to the large swinging metal door. I lean into the bed and push a little harder to get up the incline. Tish and I set the brakes on the wheels, and I grab the handle and pull. The door makes a popping noise as the seal is broken into the room. The room itself is fairly small, and the first thing you notice is the smell. It is terrible, formaldehyde and slow decay. It was a good thing I hadn't eaten anything recently because the stench was especially vile that day. I pushed the bed in containing Susan's body all the way to the back of the freezer. A loud thunk announced that I had gotten it all the way in. The cold inside the room sent goosebumps up and down my arms as I turned around to leave, wanting to get out of there. As I went to leave, the door to the room swung shut, encasing me in the freezing cold. "Tish, this isn't funny. Let me out," I yelled through the door. The lights flickering, and then half of them went out. I reached over to flick the switch off and on, but the other half of the lights refused to come back on. I banged on the door with my fists, letting Tish know that I didn't think this was funny and to let me out. I heard a muffled noise on the other side of the door, but couldn't make out what it was that she was saying. I heard a ticking noise coming from behind me. I looked up to the fan in the vent, thinking that is the source of the noise, but the fan blade wasn't moving. Huh, that's weird, I said to the empty room. Suddenly it feels like the room drops at least 10 degrees. The tapping noise begins to get louder and more insistent. I looked around, trying to find out where the noise was coming from. It sounded like something striking metal, but the only thing metal in the room was the drawers holding the bodies. The ticking noise starts again. It was coming from the drawers, but I didn't know how that could be. The only thing in there would have been another body. I walked over to the drawer and put my ear right next to it, trying to see if, in fact, that was where it was coming from, but the noise refused to cooperate. I walked back to the door, ready to start my protest to Tish all over again. As soon as my open palm hit the door once, the entire room went black. Without light, you couldn't see 6 inches in front of your face, so I put my back to the door, as that way I at least knew where I was. I began slapping the door over and over again, as the dark squeezed in around me. "Help me. Please help me." A female voice in front of me whispered. Tish, get me out of here," I yelled. Tears of fear and panic stung my eyes and my face as they trickled down my face in the cold. Someone or something was in there with me, and I was almost thankful I couldn't see what was speaking to me. I heard a dragging noise coming toward me on the floor, and I felt something touch my foot. I recoiled onto one leg, trying to get away from what was right beneath me. "Tish, please," I sobbed. The unseen thing below me grabbed hold of my leg and felt like it was pulling itself up my body. I slapped my hand again and again on the door, trying to get her to open the door. Its hand was near my stomach, and I clenched my eyes tightly shut, hoping to not see the phantom. The next thing I know, I'm falling backwards, a brief moment of weightlessness, and then pain as my head hits the floor. At first, I think that whatever had been on me has pulled me to the ground, but I hear Tish's voice above me. "Hey, are you okay?" "The door wouldn't open, it got stuck," she said. I reached up to the back of my head, and I felt the beginnings of a nasty bump where my head had hit the ramp. My eyes dart to the freezer looking for whatever had been in there, but the room was empty, and all the lights were on. There was no way I had hallucinated the entire thing. At least I didn't think so, but all that was in the room was the bed that I had just pushed in. "I need to get out of here now," I told her. "What are you talking about?" She looked at me. "I need to get out of here right now," I said with a little more force. She cocked an eyebrow up at me, then turned and shut the door. "You're acting weird," she said back. "Let me look at that bump on your head." "I'm fine, let's just go, please." I shooed her off with my hand. It took everything I had not to run straight to the elevator that night. But I can tell you, the sense of relief I felt when I got back to our floor was like a huge weight had been lifted off my chest. I will not go down there alone to this day. I found out later that I'm not the only person who has experienced this down there. But until that night, I wouldn't have believed them if they had told me. I try to pass off the duty to take bodies of our patients down there anytime I can, but luckily for me, nothing has happened again. I just hope it stays that way.
The mall was not my ideal job. I'm like any other person. Sometimes you must work a job that is only okay before you get to have the job that you truly enjoy. The mall I worked at was both an outdoor and indoor mall. Some of the eateries were on the outside for easy access to patrons, while a few were littered here and there on the inside as well. The employees were friendly to a point. They helped me learn quite quickly, and I was off doing my job in the basement. The basement was not my favorite place to work at all. Unfortunately, I was stuck working down there for over a year. In the basement, they kept a lot of the extra merchandise for most of the stores. My job was pricing and tagging it in case they needed to do a quick restock, which, around the holidays, was fairly often. Almost on the dot daily, I would arrive at 8 in the morning. I often would be sporting a sweater because it was fall. The basement was always the perfect temperature until 10 in the morning. At 10 o'clock every morning, even though it was warming up outside, it would turn freezing in the basement. I always had to layer on an additional jacket, and I could see my breath. At first, that was the only odd thing, so I would just go about my job. Then there was this radio in the corner. It was a cheap, old 80s radio. Sometimes I would use it for background noise while I shifted boxes around, getting to more items to price. But more often than not, I would be so enthralled with the job I was doing that I would forget it even existed. Sometimes, however, it would turn on randomly, by itself. I would drop what I was doing and go over and turn it off. I would always think to myself that I should ask management if I could throw it out because the dang thing was glitchy, but I never did. Another time, I was working by a table. I had out a bunch of dolls in their boxes. I had to go to the bathroom super bad. I kept looking over my shoulder as I was working because I felt like I was being watched. Finally, when I felt like I was at a stopping point to where I could go relieve myself, I went to the bathroom. Drying my hands off on my pants as I came back from the bathroom because the paper towel dispenser was on the fritz again, I stopped in my tracks. I stood there, frozen in place, for a few minutes. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and my mouth had to be gaping open in shock. I must have had around 20 doll boxes on that table. The boxes were ripped to shreds on the floor. The dolls were lined up perfectly next to each other on the table. Try explaining that one to your manager. I did not get fired, but I did have to reimburse the company for each of those dolls out of my next paycheck. At this point, everything was definitely adding up. This was not just a few weird things happening. Something was going on in this basement, and now it was costing me money. Fast forward a week, maybe two. I had just put in for a department transfer after the doll incident. A coworker was helping me load some merchandise onto a dolly so he could bring it upstairs to one of the stores. To our amazement, a toy truck came out from behind some boxes and started driving itself around in circles. Its siren was blaring. Woo! Woo! He looked at me, and I looked back at him. We both got out of there as fast as we could. I sat him down upstairs on our break, explaining everything I had been going through. I was lucky he witnessed the truck incident because he helped me convince my manager to lower the cost of the dolls on my check, as well as to approve my department move. I have not had the luxury of working in the basement for several years, and never plan to again. I now work upstairs, in the mall. Do I hear stories from others who have worked in the basement? Yes, all the time. And I believe every one of them.
A long time ago, when I was a child, we grew up next to a home that had a tremendously violent history. The first owners of the home were murdered by an escaped convict. The next couple to purchase the home did not remain married exceedingly long before their marriage ended in turmoil and tension. At one point, the wife had had enough and jumped from the upstairs window while holding their baby, killing them both. One evening, my parents were driving home when a freak snowstorm occurred. Being unable to make the drive, they'd asked our neighbors to care for us until they could finish their journey home. My brother and I knew full well the history of this home and were not pleased at all of having to stay there. At first, everything seemed calm and normal, but not long after our arrival did subtle things begin to occur. To start off, my brother and I were watching television in their living room not too long before bed. Then, the television began switching on and off and glitching out. We were slightly concerned, exchanging nervous glances, but chalked it up to possibly the storm messing with the power or something. Then, while in the bathroom getting ready for bed, I was startled by the sound of a glass shattering in the shower. It sounded as if someone had thrown it and it broke into 1,000 pieces. I ran to get Dale, the man of the house, and made him check behind the curtain. There was nothing behind it. No glass, nothing out of the ordinary at all. Having to go to bed at that point and still shaken by the crazy glass incident, I was on edge. I was to sleep on our neighbor's couch that night, and I asked them to leave the kitchen light on so I would not be scared. As I was starting to doze off, I heard the creaking of wood followed by a noticeably light thud here and there. I opened one eye suspiciously and peered around the room, and my gaze fell onto the rocking chair. It was rocking by itself. Creak. Thud. My ears were like saucers, and I was frozen in place. My brother lay across from me on the loveseat, already snoring away. I pulled the blanket over my face and started to cry. I was so terrified. Under the blanket, I trembled and prayed for it to stop. After about 10 minutes, the room finally fell silent except for the deep breaths of my brother sleeping. It was exceedingly difficult to fall asleep after that. I laid there for what seemed like hours, still under the blanket, terrified to peek out. Finally, I dozed off. In the middle of the night, I was awoken by the sound of footsteps coming down the stairs. For a moment, I pulled the blanket off my face and scanned the room. My brother was awake as well and sitting upright, listening to them. We exchanged worried glances, and I motioned for him to join me on the couch, which he did almost immediately, and we shivered in fear while holding each other. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs and then ceased. Although they dissipated, we both stayed huddled together for a good 20 minutes or more. Finally, my brother went back to his loveseat and laid down, as did I. I don't know how long it took for us to fall asleep, but we finally did until morning. The next morning, we were both open and honest with Dale and his wife about what we had heard. I asked them how they could stay in such a creepy house, and they shrugged and said it was probably the house just settling, and they were used to it. Thinking about it today just freaks me out as much as it did back then. At the very least, there was no explanation for the footsteps. I have never heard a house settle and have it sound like that before. That was the creepiest night of my life, and you would be correct if you assumed I stayed as far away from their house as possible the rest of our time in that neighborhood. I'd even started walking to school the long way so that I didn't have to walk past their creepy haunted house.
I was on the phone with my child's insurance company. My baby was in his crib, in the bedroom asleep, as I paced the living room with the phone up to my ear. The bedroom door was open so I could periodically check on him while I was on the phone. At this point, I'd been on hold for about 10 minutes and was starting to get agitated regarding the amount of time I was having to hang on. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a black figure glide across the hallway and into my son's room. With a quizzical look on my face, I kept the phone to my ear and went towards my son's room to investigate. The minute I arrived at his doorway, the door slammed shut in my face. I threw the phone on the floor and began hastily trying to turn the knob on the door. It would not turn. I ran to the adjoining bathroom. My hands at this point were shaky and sweaty, but the door was not locked, and after 2 tries, I was able to get the door open. Once in the room, I noticed my son had woken up, but was not crying. He was staring at the door that had slammed shut with a curious look on his face. I scooped him up to check him out. He was completely fine. I glanced around the room while holding him close and saw nothing amiss. Although there was nothing in there, the air was heavy, and I had an extremely creepy feeling something was watching me. I walked over to the door that had slammed shut and locked. However, the lock was in the position of being unlocked. I grabbed the handle and turned it. It opened simply fine. I had to be the protector, so I slowly turned my head in the direction of her finger and looked at the ceiling. I did not see a man with no eyes, but I did see a black mist up by the ceiling. I scooped my daughter up and brought her into my room. That's where we both slept with the door locked, like it would have kept out a spirit. For several years, my daughter has told me about the man with no eyes. She says he does nothing to harm her. He just stares at her in the middle of the night. Sometimes he's on the ceiling, and sometimes he is in her closet.